Monarch, of course, we all know that she was the longest reigning monarch and really had so many prime ministers that she had to deal with, learn with and move forward with. But who taught her? And what's fascinating about this particular story is simply that really she did absolutely turn to some of them, not all of them, but some of them for direction. But there was one in particular that she thoroughly got on with, saw herself as something of a father figure for him, and he absolutely delighted in this particular role. As ever, let me explain. Hi, good morning, nice to see you. Thank you so much as ever for your time today. We'll have a lovely wave. You all right? Keeping well? Not bad, thank you. Yes, well, yes, absolutely. You know, it's funny, as I've said before here on the show, I've met quite a lot of prime ministers over my time. One of the people I do remember meeting a few years back now, quite a few, was Edward Heath, the Right Honourable Edward Heath. Of course, the right title, somebody said, why'd you call him that? That is the title we should give them. Edward Heath was at a TV studio, and I think I may have mentioned this before, and he was there for an unveiling of a portrait. That didn't go down well. Tough character, Ed, you know, not exactly friendly, warm, that type of thing. But nonetheless, he got there to be Prime Minister, so you understand how that works. Now, the Queen didn't necessarily get on with all of her Prime Ministers. Jim Callaghan, for instance, not a particular favourite. She got on very well with Gordon Brown. Tony Blair, middling, I would say. But her favourite, according to a very well-placed source, was none other than this man. That's right, the Right Honourable Winston Churchill. Now, there was a reason as to why she got on really well with him, because this was the direction from her father, King George. You see, he got on incredibly well with him, obviously during the war years. And not only that, Winston was very aware and very sort of attuned to the fact that His Majesty was very nervous at public speaking. And along with Lionel Logue, gave him a lot of advice on what to do and how to fill and study for moments and stuff like that. They built a relationship, and that was none more so when you consider it. You obviously noted that he was invited onto the balcony at the end of the war at Buckingham Palace. That was how much they respected him, the Queen and of course the princesses. So you can understand that very quickly when she became Queen in 1952, and then of course the coronation in 53, she turned to Winston a lot because he was her Prime Minister at that time. The difficulties that she had, apparently, according to this well-placed source who knew Winston well, was really how to click in with the public, you know. You've got to remember she'd lived a totally different life to the average Joe. You know, yes, we know she'd worked in the army, she'd done all sorts of pieces and sneaked out on VE Day and stuff like that. But, you know, there were still different times. And what she was concerned about was that the British public wouldn't welcome her. And more importantly, would she understand them? So this is where Winston stepped in. A lot of people, Winston Churchill was very formidable, you know, but not to Her Majesty the Queen. She'd known him for many years, and all thanks to her father and of course her mother, she knew exactly the sort of character that he was. He was a lot more friendly and bumbling off camera, as it were, off public domain, and she got on with him on that basis. As I said, the Queen didn't necessarily get on with all of her prime ministers for obvious reasons, but for him, I think because of her father saying he was a good man and you could trust him, she did. Now, what happened was, as she sort of moved into her, you know, start of her reign, as I say, she was concerned exactly. She knew the job, she'd been trained on that, but she didn't necessarily know how to react to the public and really what she should do. Now, one of the first things that Winston Churchill suggested was to go and get movies sent to the palace on a more regular basis, find out what the public were watching, particularly the big hitters, the comedies, you know, the sort of things that they may interest them. So you have conversation pieces about, yes, I've seen that, or I was lucky enough to go to that, etc. You know, the sort of thing. Likewise, newspapers, magazines, books, and even, yes, you know, the newsreels. She had to watch them so that basically she could say, yes, she knew what was going on. Not that she wasn't attuned that was going on to the world, but what really the subjects across the Commonwealth, what were they interested in? Now, every week, as everybody knows, the Prime Minister and the monarch have that weekly meeting. And it's rare to really to discuss what's going on in the world of politics and how they're dealing with it, good or bad, as it were. And what happened was, you know, they'd have that meeting, and then there was an extension added to that where he would discuss things that he'd seen or heard, or, you know, his wife had mentioned and stuff like that. So this gave the Queen small talk at things like, you know, banquets and places like that where she had to meet other people. You've got to remember, and people forget this, that at the very start, Her Majesty the Queen was incredibly shy. you know, a little bit like her father. Princess Margaret was more outgoing, as we know, but the Queen really was always reserved and wondered whether she'd said the right thing or whatever. And in the end, what happened was Winston Churchill basically was her, shall we say, Svengali. He helped her through the very early dark days of her reign. Let's not forget, very quickly she had to pick up the job and cope with the loss of her father, her beloved father, who she missed enormously. And all thanks to this British Prime Minister, well, he did his very best to take at least a minor place. She repaid that, of course, with turning up for his retirement party at Downing Street for a very special dinner. And also, finally, when he was put to rest in 1965. That's the impact that Winston Churchill had on her. I've mentioned this before, you know, so many prime ministers that she met, but there were very few standout ones. And according to a source that was there during that particular period, who I was lucky enough to meet, the bottom line was the Queen thought so much of Winston Churchill. And many people might say, and rightly so. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.